Today's speaker, the first speaker of this digital Chesterton conference, is a familiar face to anyone who's been to the last, 4, 5, 6 Chesterton conferences. Her name is Dr. Virginia de la Lastra, and she's from Chile. You'll recognize her by her vivacious spirit, her Chilean accent, her exuberance for Chesterton. She's just a delight. You'll fall in love with her after the first few minutes of listening to her talk, I'm sure. Let me give you a little background on Virginia. She's a medical doctor with a specialty in clinical microbiology. Okay, so she's super smart is what basically that means. Virginia works at the Teen STAR program. She teaches at Universidad de los Andes Medical School in Chile, and she's the head of the Healthcare Associated Infections Program at Hospital de Preca. I'm horrible at Spanish, so I'm sure I'm butchering all of that. But most importantly, for our purposes here, Virginia leads the Chilean Chesterton Society. That's right, there is a Chesterton Society in Chile. So this isn't just an American phenomenon, this is a worldwide movement. The title of Virginia's talk tonight is Paging Dr. Chesterton, Microscopic Adventures in Pursuit of the Obvious. And then here's a longer subtitle, From the Smallest Facts to the Highest Truths, Chesterton's Wisdom at Medical School. So it sounds very intriguing. Virginia is going to share how Chesterton's teachings in a medical school setting show that there is a whole truth of things that Chesterton touches upon, and how he helps us to see, think, and feel about all of these things. So please join me digitally from the safety of your own living room by giving a round of applause for Virginia.
Hi, everyone. Start my video. Hi, everyone. Hello from Chile. Thank you, Brandon. And hello from Winter. So I'm going to share my screen because I drew some slides. And the name of my talk is Paging Dr. Chesterton. So Chesterton says there are 3 kinds of people in this world. The first kind of people are the people. They are the largest and probably the most valuable class. We owe to this class the chairs we sit down on, the clothes we wear. The second class are the poets. They are often a nuisance to their families, but generally speaking, a blessing to mankind. The third class is that of the professors or intellectuals, and these are a blight and a desolation both to their families and also to mankind. When I read this, I said, uh-oh, what kind of people are we at medical school? And Chesterton continues. The poet differs from the mob by his sensibility. The professor differs from the mob by his insensibility. The part about the professors gave me shivers. I tried to find the answer through 3 questions. How do we see things, think about things, and feel things? On the first question, how do we see the things that are presented to us? It was clear it was mostly by quantity, size, color, and so on. Not very poetic. The second question, how do we think about things? Do we think? We memorize many things we do not even think about. But when we do think, we have a compartmentalized way of thinking. We were among the narrow thinkers, in which there was little or no interaction between different disciplines. Finally, about sensitivity. How do we feel about things? Behind all that serious thinking, bored. This is how I came to realize I was part of the desolation to mankind. What should I do? Emergency at medical school, paging Dr. Chesterton, come here, stat. And Dr. Chesterton came. So, what was the diagnosis? He said that the diagnosis was the thing from which we suffer just now more than any other evil is not the assertion of falsehoods, but the endless and irrepressible repetition of half-truths. The whole truth is generally the ally of virtue. A half-truth is always the ally of some vice. And the cure, I wanted the cure. He said, you have to know and teach that, quote, there is a whole truth of things, and that in knowing it and speaking it, we are happy. And there were not a lot of people happy at medical school. So that's how I realized that if we want to teach the truth to our students, we should use G.K. Chesterton's way of teaching, because he teaches to see things as they should be seen, think things as they should be thought, and feel things as they should be felt. But if we want to teach the truth, what is it and what it is not? Chesterton says that truth is a fact with a meaning, but with a well-discerned meaning. In order to discern the meaning of a fact, we need both imagination and reason. C.S. Lewis says that imagination is the organ of meaning and reason is the organ of truth. But imagination comes first, since before something can be true or false, it has to mean something. And what is the half-truth? Well, last week, one of my nieces, who has just learned how to read Cinderella for the first time, suddenly she stated Cinderella was very mean. Why, we asked? Because it says here that her only friends were the animals of the house. Fact, absence of human friends, meaning Cinderella was mean. The fact is absolutely right, but not the meaning. This is an example of a fragmented truth. Facts are not the same as truths. Some facts have meaning, other facts do not. And this is why Chesterton warns about the danger of statistics. We are filled with statistics at medical school. Statistics deals with facts, not with truths. Chesterton says that statistics are not merely untrue, they are also wicked. Most of the time, they get the fact wrong, but even when they are correct, they are entirely misleading. The thing they say may be possibly and really true, but even then, the thing they mean is false. Statistics will tell us that out of 500 Cinderellas, 100% did not have human friends. But we will hear mean neighbors, individualistic Cinderella, animal lover Cinderella, and so on. As Chesterton points out, the explanation is that it is impossible for the human intellect, which is divine, to hear a fact as a fact. Statistics never give the truth because they never give the reasons. And facts do not give the meaning nor the reasons. So taking all these factors into consideration, could we teach that there is a whole truth of things at medical school if my class was clinical microbiology? Here you have my bacteria. It deals mostly with facts and with very small facts. But Chesterton gave hope by saying that the study of the humblest fact will lead to the study of the highest truth. Furthermore, Chesterton states that everything which is true is connected. There is only one subject, he says. There must be a philosophical connection between any two things in the universe. If it is not so, we can only say that there is no universe and can be no philosophy. So there had to be a way to find the whole truth through the microscope. And this is how our microscopic adventures in pursuit of the obvious began. So how to teach the truth? At first I thought reason was the right way for this adventure, but Chesterton disagreed. Reason is always a kind of brute force. Those who appeal to the head rather than the heart, however pallid and polite, are necessarily made of violence. We speak of touching a man's heart, but we can do nothing to his head but hit it. So no hitting. And sometimes it's so delightful to hit heads. Chesterton and Father O'Connor, in whom Chesterton based his Father Brown stories, used to point out to each other the phenomenon that some people can make any truth look like the most damnable or odious falsehood. They knew that truth is but a nuisance without charity. Thus, it was highly improbable that the solution of teaching truth through logic with philosophical arguments could get massive interest from my students. Besides, giving only arguments raises barriers, since my students quite rightly become aware that somebody is trying to convince them, hit them on the head, or worse, brainwash them. Okay, so no brainwashing. I made sure they would know that this is not my intention. Here am I, washing brains, and they are very clean. They are hanging on there. And I'm singing, whistling while you work, la 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 la. Well, I call this illustration a very clean desolation to mankind. They are lucky that neatness is not one of my strengths. So, well, reason alone does not answer all the questions. The real trouble with this world, says Chesterton, is that it is nearly reasonable, but not quite. It is more likely that reason alone will drive us crazy. Okay, so back to how to teach it. Paradoxically, the adventure taught me that the best way to teach the whole truth is not to tell it, at least not right away. Truth is one of those secrets which are too good to be told. Chesterton says that truth is sacred, and if you tell the truth too often, nobody will believe it. The quest for truth must be an enjoyable adventure of discovery. According to him, the best way to tell it is as a surprise, like a detective story. Therefore, one has to be careful not to spoil the adventure. Chesterton warns that the man who tells the truth about a detective story is simply a wicked man, and he belongs in the lowest of the circles of hell. Okay, I thought. So, no hitting, no brainwashing, not telling it unless it is as a surprise. Chesterton teaches that in this microscopic quest for truth, the experience of truth is as important as words. The taste and see of the truth is as essential as reason, but tasting precedes it. Ultimately, truth cannot be reached only from the outside. Truth needs experiential knowledge, which comes from the inside. The experience of a truth can move people's hearts in a way that abstract arguments cannot. And the excitement and joy that a glimpse of a whole truth carries might leave my students wanting for more. Chesterton is the best teacher to reveal the truth through both experience and reason. And his first prescription is to see things as they should be seen. Before to start thinking about things, even microbiology things, we need to see them as they really are. Chesterton says that everything we see has a meaning, for it is impossible for anything to signify nothing. The right way to see the world is to see it as if it has just been created, as if we have seen it for the first time. To see things as new awakes wonder, which is the ground for common sense. Chesterton says, astonishment at the universe is not mysticism, but transcendental common sense. But common sense is hard because we have sinned and grown old. Most probably we are in Eden still. It is only our eyes that have changed. Our eyes grew old and cannot see things as they really are and wonder at them. The things we see every day are the things we never see at all, says Chesterton. Moreover, he points out to a paradox that the more a man looks at a thing, the less he sees it. And the more a man learns a thing, the less he knows it. Blindness comes with familiarity. A man can get used to terrible things. He can even grow accustomed to the sun, warns Chesterton. In consequence, we take our world for granted. As Chesterton says, so long as we regard a tree as an obvious thing, naturally unreasonable, created for a giraffe to eat, we cannot properly wonder at it. And this is why we need imagination. Imagination, the organ of meaning, can wake us up from our sleep. Chesterton says what is wanted is the truly godlike imagination, which makes all things new, because all things have been new. The function of imagination is not so much to make wonders facts, but to make facts wonders, he concludes. Through imagination, we can discover new meanings of things and taste transcendental truths. Chesterton is fantastic at finding new meanings in everything, including microbiology. For instance, he teaches that size does not exist in itself. Size is always relative to something else. In orthodoxy, he asks, why should one worry to call the universe large if there is nothing to compare it with? With this idea in mind, I looked again at my bacteria, leaving their size out. And I realized I was dealing with monstrous beings. It all depended from where one would look at them. Since then, I do not give lectures on microorganisms. I teach monsters. Ultimately, bacteria are monsters, but because we do not see them, we do not realize it. And besides, it's way easier to remember monsters than bacteria. Since imagination conceives in the mind something which is not present, it needs definitions. Definitions are the basis of the thinking process. Since, as Chesterton says, you cannot think if there are no things to think about. Some people claim that definitions put a limit to ideas, but Chesterton clarifies that definitions are ideas. A snake's head and tail do not limit the snake, they make it. Thus, imagination is essential to good thinking. Imagination leads to wonder. Wonder leads to good definitions, and good definitions leads to good thinking, which is the next thing Chesterton teaches. Thinking things as they should be thought. Chesterton says that the aim of thinking is to find truth. He defines the act of thinking as the act of connecting things. Few things are more important than thinking, since bad thinking can be fatal. As Chesterton says, if you think wrong, you go wrong. And we were going wrong in the medical disciplines. By defining our terms in microbiology, we ran into several surprises. The first surprise was that we discovered that we could argue and not quarrel and discover things together. My students, even though my medical school is an Opus Dei medical school, my students are secular. We do not choose our student. The government chooses by tests. So this was very helpful in controversial subjects, such as STDs. Most of my students are fearful of this topic because they have had bad experiences discussing, quarreling about this area. But definitions fight fairly, and controversial disputes start to become clear. Honestly, it is delightful to see their eyes open by pointing out a few distinctions, such as orientation versus behavior, behavior versus actions, which has the connotation of the will. Only then, some errors, such as confusing behavior with orientation, behavior with virtue, we start having some common ground. Chesterton teaches us to always define our terms in everything, even microbiology, everything. Since, as Chesterton says, evil always takes advantage of ambiguity. After defining our terms, we can even start playing. I make up a game with selections from different scientific articles or statements called Find the Vague Term. And well, this is an example, and you will find several things wrong with this. But here it says, For example, this is a statement from a scientific society about the rise of HIV here in Chile. And when I translated it, but they said these things. We see that this increase, which has been occurring for the last 10 years, is due to multiple causes, but especially the lack of sexual education, ignorance about STDs, STD prevention methods, young people changes in their sexual behaviors, among others. And it was like, first it is due, no hypothesis. What do they mean by prevention methods? Changes, what changes? We don't know. And we start playing. And they continue. We insist it is essential to focus in the prevention of HIV infection by encouraging healthy sexuality education programs. What is that? I have no idea. And increasing and expanding information campaigns among teenagers and adults. So see the last sentence here, and we start finding philosophy. Look at this idea, increasing and expanding information campaigns. And here we have philosophy. The cause of evil is ignorance, and the solution, information campaigns. This solution is in the most literal sense Platonic. Plato thought that the cause of evil was ignorance, and that if people knew the good, they would do it. Some of my students will point out that Plato and the scientists are making a mistake by assuming that the elements of our soul, the rational, spirited, and the appetites are ordered. And this is how we then continue to Aristotle and the importance of the will. And all these in microbiology class. This is how philosophy becomes alive in all these scientific hypotheses, but the adventure continues. The next stop in our venture is theology. After discussing Plato and Aristotle, I asked my students what kind of information they would provide their patients so that they would avoid actions associated with infection risks. The answers are, I love them. I love their answers. You could be infected for the rest of your life, or you could infect others and you will have pain, infertility, and my favorite, death. And this is when I congratulate them for their answers and I welcome them to hell. And here you have abandon all hope, you who enter here. But if we are going to enter hell, we need a guide. So I asked Virgil to guide us. And here you have Virgil. And Virgil leads the way to a very special hell. Here you can see Dante's hell, the Naraka hell, the Niflheim, but we're going to the infectious hell. This hell is filled with pus waterfalls, bacteria, viruses, low CD4, pain, isolation, fear, and so on. At this point, we realize that scientifically, we are doing the same that we accuse the ill-taught religion of doing, threatening people with hell. And both hells, Dante's hell and the infectious hell, bring feelings of fear and guilt. Some of my students will say, but this is real. And I say, well, some of us think both of these hells are real. But I think the threat with the infectious hell is worse. Let's compare them. And I love comparing hells. So let's start with Dante's hell. This hell is terrible, filled with all sorts of everlasting horrors. And the infectious hell, what happens with that, they ask me. Well, all sorts of infectious horrors, isolation, and pain. But many people who only believe in the infectious hell think they only exist while they are alive in this world. Thus, for them, it is also an everlasting hell. But there is a huge difference. As Chesterton points out, Dante describes 3 moral instruments: heaven, purgatory, and hell. The vision of perfection, the vision of improvement, and the vision of failure. On the contrary, this modern morality can only point with absolute convictions to the horrors that follow breaches of law. Its only certainty is a certainty of ill. It can only point to imperfection. It has no perfection to point to, he concludes. The infectious hell is more horrible because there is no infectious heaven, no ideal. Only staying alive is the ideal. And if they tell you, hey, I did this and I did not get infected, you can always answer, but maybe the next time you will. Health is too wide and vague to constitute an ideal, but an ideal is more sensible than hell. Chesterton says a young man may keep himself from vice by continually thinking of disease. He may keep himself from it also by continually thinking of the Virgin Mary. There may be a question about which method is the more reasonable, or even about which is the more efficient. But surely there can be no question about which is the more wholesome. This is how, through thinking, we start reaching a well-rounded truth. Suddenly, we realize that things which seemed disconnected, such as hell, philosophy, and the ideal, are part of a whole. Moreover, through teaching us how to think, Chesterton also teaches us how to feel the things we think about. So now we go, feeling the things as they should be felt. Chesterton uses the test of imagination to teach that things could have been different or not have been at all. It is through this test that Chesterton teaches the distinction between facts that are necessary, rational, and inevitable from the facts that have been associated by mere repetition. You cannot imagine 2 and 1 not making 3. But you can easily imagine trees growing golden candlesticks or tigers hanging on by the tail, he explains. By making this distinction, he smashes the idea of a predictable world, awaking wonder and surprise at the fact that things are as they are. There is no logical connection between flying and laying eggs. Chesterton points out that everything has been saved from a wreck. For the world and every man are a great might not have been. He rejoices in the being of things exactly for the reason of being as they are. By seeing all alternatives of how a thing could have been, he sees something very personal in the world. Therefore, I thought, microorganisms are also part of this great might not have been. And the test of the imagination can be applied to them as well. In order to do so, Chesterton and I came up with an activity in my microbiology class. It is called, here you have it, In Search of Your Inner Bacteria. The instructions are as follows. You can play as well if you want to. In this activity, you will have to imagine yourself as a bacterium that has not been discovered yet. You have to design the bacterium you want to become. Choose a shape, choose a structure, choose a site of infection, choose a way of life, and your pathogenic tools. Then you have to draw yourself as a bacterium. It's not art class, so I don't mind if they don't draw themselves perfectly well, or if they do it with the computer. And you have to give yourself a bacteria name. The whole point is that they have to create a bacterium that makes sense. The consistency between the bacterium structure and its possibility of causing infection is evaluated. Imagination cannot go against logic. Things themselves have limitations that are necessary, or else they could not be what they are. There is no such thing as a free thought without limits. For, as Chesterton says, the moment you step into the world of facts, you step into the world of limits. In the same way, one can imagine flying bacteria, aquatic bacteria, space bacteria, but we cannot imagine a bacterium being and not being a bacterium at the same time. As Chesterton says, we cannot free things from the laws of their own nature. Since if you free a camel from the burden of his hump, you may be freeing him from being a camel. This activity forces my students to see things from a whole new perspective, a bacterium perspective, and from a might have been bacterium. This helps to awake wonder in them. Immediately, they place themselves in their bacterium shoes, how they're going to get food, reach their target organ, avoid the immune system, and so on. They also start to make connections between different disciplines, such as history, geology, astronomy. They need critical thinking to create a sensical bacterium, and therefore this is a novel way to learn how to think. This is a bacterium military strategy. They must think like a bacterium in order to become an effective one and achieve their objective. Some bacteria are supposed to be deadly. All my students want to be deadly bacteria, most of them, and terrible and cause meningitis, but they lack the tools to penetrate the barriers or to avoid the immune system. Others achieve their objective. Meet here Atlantida perniciosum, which killed the whole Atlantis population. It can persist in latent form as a spore. Recently, it was discovered by some scientists inside of an iceberg. And meet here, I cannot pronounce this name even in Spanish, so I won't try to say it in English, but it ends with lycanthropa. So it's a new bacterium that can cause the werewolf syndrome because it can cause hallucinations and hair growth through its toxins, which can cause different effects like mimicking some hormones. And meet here, Spectrus coniculus is a zoonosis which destroys lungs. The designers made a model of their deadly bacterium. And here you have them smiling. We did an exposition of, a created bacterium some years ago. So Chesterton does not deny that the world is as it is, but he does not take for granted facts we have associated and called the laws of nature, only by repetition and not by logic. Through the test of imagination, the might have beens teach us to see what it is and to feel grateful for it. And this is how, through all this microscopic adventure, Chesterton helped us to reach a wholesome truth by teaching us to see, think, and feel all things, among which are bacteria, as a gift. And from here, we start to feel grateful. And as Chesterton says, gratitude is the highest form of thought. Our adventure still continues, and we don't know where we're going to get, but this is where we are now. So thank you to all of you. Thank you, Dale, for inviting me. Thanks, Brandon. And I owe my thanks to so many people here and so many friends that helped me with my accent and correcting me, and my sister who has been helping me with the talk now. Oh, let me stop sharing. There we go.
Well, that was just excellent, Virginia. I loved it. I'm thinking the whole time, what would Gilbert Keith Chesterton have thought to know that his philosophy was being used in a Chilean medical school setting, 100 years after he walked the earth? I don't even think he could fathom it. I remember, Virginia, last year at the Chesterton conference, you were kind of teasing out some of these ideas with me, telling me that you had just decided to teach a lecture to all your medical students on Chesterton and STDs. And
yeah, I did that.
Yeah, and I thought, okay, that must have generated a lot of attention among your students. Like, first of all, that was such a provocative headline, but I imagined it was a lot of the similar themes here. Just great, Virginia. I also loved all the illustrations there. I think many viewers here will know that Virginia's artwork is featured very often in the Gilbert magazine. So if you're a member of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton, you receive in the mail the great Gilbert magazine, which often includes some of Virginia's beautiful art. Listen, Virginia, I had a few questions for you, but given the time constraint, I'd rather just hop into some of the questions that people are asking in the chat box. And again, remember, we've got hundreds of people watching this. If you have questions at any point during the conference, whether about Chesterton in general, about Virginia's great talk, please leave them in the chat box. We don't want this just to be a one-way flow of information. We want to have a real dialogue and conversation with some of you guys. Let's see here. We've got some, here's a good comment. This one's from Naja. She said, I'm so glad to hear, Virginia, that you are doing this with medical students in Chile. Chile and many other Latin American countries are total battlegrounds with a lot of external pressure on hot topics. Is this an approach you are sharing, which I think is clear based on the presentation you gave, but more importantly, how do you see its effects? So how would your medical students who just heard some of the concepts that you just presented, how do they respond? Is it kind of over their head? Are they engaged? What's the general feedback?
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's a great question. Actually, when I did this, well, with the bacteria thing at first, when I did it, they thought it was like sort of, childish, but it was hard. And then they had a hard time. And when I do these lectures on STDs and stuff. Well, last year, one of the students, they were almost in tears. It was so strange. And one of them came and he said, hey, doctor, when you said this distinction, it was like boom in my head. And it was great because you cannot put thoughts on people's head. So even though you want to, hit them on the head sometimes, but the thing is that you start teaching them how to think on their own. And then they have to see that it is joyful. You don't want to hit them. You don't want to hurt them. So it's been going, actually my students have been talking about that class more than any other. So they actually are talking around it.
Here's another question. This one comes from Ed Zukowski. He's wondering, Virginia, I'm curious, are many or few of the people in your discipline, and I'm thinking he probably means the medical students, are they religious or are they non-religious? What's kind of the religious makeup of the students that you're interacting with?
Well, I would say most of them are not religious, and they are enraged with religion here, at least lately.
Virginia, one thing that your talk called to mind for me, this is the case in America, I'm assuming it's the same in Chile, is how many disciplines in the world of science, math, and medicine are so ignorant of the disciplines of philosophy and religion. And it's not their fault. They just aren't required to take philosophy classes or critical reasoning classes. And so some of the Chestertonian principles you laying out are essentially like philosophy 101, definition of terms and forming rational chains of reason. But we're not getting that. I mean, are the medical students in Chile, what sort of, if any, philosophical training do they have before they even get to medical school?
To be honest, none. Actually, I went up to the States to study apologetics because I didn't know how to think, and Chesterton was teaching me. So I was the first one to learn. I'm still learning.
Well, I think you're well ahead of the curve based on the presentation. Here's one. This is from our good friend Kevin O'Brien. He says, Virginia, would you talk a little bit about your experiences with the COVID outbreak in Santiago?
Oh, really, Kevin? The thing is that I'm in charge of that at my hospital, and it's been like a little bit of a nightmare. But well, we're better now, and we have ventilators, and well, yeah, things are better. So I hope everyone.
Are you guys under basically the same sorts of restrictions as us Americans?
We had been in lockdown for 3 months. So I could go to the hospital back and forward every day, but yeah. But I hate the virus, Kevin. So I cannot be up there because of that damn virus. So.
Got a couple more good ones here for you, Virginia. This one's from Peter. He wants to know, Virginia, did you develop your art through drawing microbes, or microbes through learning art?
Oh, that's so weird. Actually, I discovered I was good at drawing at the 2015 Chesterton conference by whining about the covers of the orthodoxy books. So it was Chesterton actually brought me to discover that I was good at drawing. I ended up drawing microbes as well, but I love to draw.
You strike me as having a similar trajectory as Chesterton, as kind of, he starts off just by doodling on the backs of books on little pieces of paper, and then he realizes, I have a pretty good talent for this, and now he's drawing characters and illustrating books, and it seems like you've followed that same trajectory as well.
Yes, it has been pretty surprising because I discovered 4 years ago I was good at drawing while living in the US. But it was a surprise. I started drawing Chesterton first and the microbes later.
Okay, here's $1 million question from Leo Schwartz. He says, as a piggyback to Kevin's question about COVID and Santiago, how do you think Dr. Chesterton would respond to the current pandemic? What would he be writing about right now?
I think keeping your head on, because it is so easy to lose your head and your heart in this pandemic. And yeah, so basically we're losing our heads, and that's what he will be writing about, I think.
I think we got time here maybe for 2 more. Here's one from Tom Strepone. He says, are you formulating courses with Chesterton? I'm thinking he means like officially on the syllabus, Chesterton. And if so, is there any pushback from the school that you teach in? Do they kind of say, well, this guy's, a religious figure, no religion, so you can't teach Chesterton? Or are you kind of just smuggling him in there without really asking permission?
I smuggle him. I just smuggle. It's way fun. It's way more fun. And besides, they love him. It's just that they don't know. I plagiarize Chesterton. Everything wise that I say is Chesterton in the end. I tell them if they want to know Chesterton, just go back to the source.
Good. Well, how about this final one? This is a good concluding question. This one's from Lee Sundino. Virginia, what's your favorite work by Chesterton?
I think orthodoxy. And that's the one that actually changed my whole life. The ethics in Elfland is what most people would say, but it's what changed my life actually. And then
how so? Say more about that. How did it change your life?
I was in my last year at medical school, finishing it, and I had run out of books for a break when I was studying internal medicine. So I went to my grandparents' house, and there was orthodoxy. Never read Chesterton. So I read it, and I remember I was studying renal failure, and suddenly these orthodoxy books started taking over, and my exam was a day away, and I was reading, and I remember thinking, this is way more important. This is way more important. And then I summarized it and the chapter, and I sent it by email to all of my friends. I have really good friends because they did not kick me out, and they're still friends.
They didn't mark your email as spam and send it into the trash, right?
Yeah, no, they didn't. They're really good. And they said, thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Virginia. but actually, that book changed all the way I saw the world. And that chapter got me thinking for a whole 10 years. And I ended up in Houston studying apologetics. So yeah, it pretty much changed everything.
Well, again, Virginia, thanks so much for your great talk, paging Dr. Chesterton. I think maybe I'll confirm this later with the behind the scenes team, but I'm pretty sure we're recording all these talks and making them available to members of the society. So if you want to rewatch it, maybe share it with a friend or family member, we'll have it for you later. But Virginia, thanks again for logging in and joining us.
Thank you, Brandon. And thank you, everyone.
Good. Well, listen, let's transition now to